Can I ask you, please, now to react? Because what we've heard, I think, has been very provocative. And if you look at the CVs of our speakers, you can see the amount of experience that they both have. Mrs. Bull, Mr. Carrera, you have, I know as well, made your speeches available. I think they should be published. I hope you wouldn't mind if that were the case. And would like written versions to be available so that we can put them on the internet, so that we can also think about what you've said. So now I'd like comments, please, from the audience.
Sie müssen bitte noch einen Moment warten.
I'm sorry, you have to wait a moment. I do apologize. We'll start on the right.
Thank you very much. I have to introduce because I didn't give my name. My name is Rainite Bodara. I'm former MEP from Lithuania in ALDE Group. And indeed, I want to thank you, Mr. Carrera, because you addressed something what I was thinking of since a long time, since I worked in the European Parliament, and then later on. And today, I see that you addressed the issue which I did not succeed to go through while working in LIBE committee, when I raised the issue when we were preparing human rights reports in the world, and the European Union was never mentioned there. So I was asking question, is European Union in the world, or we are not? Or if we have human rights problems, or we don't have them? And especially it was a very crucial question to me because I was leading inter-parliamentary committee with Central Asian countries and Mongolia. And I was always fighting with those representatives from Uzbekistan, from Kazakhstan, from whichever stan, when they were telling, you are writing whatever resolutions about human rights in our countries. Why don't you talk about human rights violations in your countries? And they were giving samples to me, concrete samples. So thank you for addressing this issue. I have much more optimism today because I see that you addressed, that Mrs. Reding addressed, that she said, we have to say to Germany and France where you are violating treaties or human rights, straightforward to the face, not only addressing new member states that they are sort of violating rules or whatever. So I'm very happy about this. I'm happy to see the paper that now we have addressed issues about European Union and member states and human rights in these states. So I am becoming more optimist, but still not so much, because you said that indeed what is lacking, that we don't have mechanisms how to address these issues, how to prove to people that they can believe that European Union is really standing behind their human rights. And what Jean-Marie, my colleague, just mentioned, that we have to define what Europe is responsible for. I think that European Union and institutions here, they have to be responsible to address member states where they are violating people's rights, citizens' rights. So then we will not have to sort of prepare somebody, speakers, to deliver the message to people. They will learn from concrete samples. Today, we address theoretically European Union. If we address these issues in practice, if we will deal with them, we will not need to convince people to come and vote for European elections.
Mr. Elliott.
Yes, Michael Elliott. I was a member of the Parliament, British member of the Party of European Socialists from 1984 to 1999. Just 2 points I wanted to pick up on. One is the question of free movement. I was very much involved through the Civil Liberties and Justice Committee in its early days in promoting free movement and I still strongly believe in it, and I'm absolutely nothing but contempt for the xenophobic attitudes that still persist in some quarters. But I think what we failed to recognise was that with the huge expansion of membership of the European Union, free movement would mean the movement not just of on a modest level of people wanting to seek to widen their employment and their experience in other countries, which is a very good thing, but huge movements of very large numbers of people very quickly. And there's no doubt that in one or two countries, certainly my own, this has led to pressures on infrastructure, on health, education and other things. Now, of course, many of these people who come in have made major contributions to the society that they've joined. But I think it would have been good if we'd been able to anticipate this a little more and have put in place special programs to assist those countries that were the major recipients to deal with the sudden pressure on infrastructure that did arise in some places. It would also have made life a lot better for the people who were coming in, because they wouldn't have been resented in the way that they sometimes have been. Although, as I say, you can never forget that some people do have really nasty and unpleasant xenophobic attitudes. The other thing I wanted to say, and it was really following on what Doris Pack was saying, and that is the enormous value that our education and training programs, now hugely expanded. I was involved quite a bit with them in the very early days, but now hugely expanded, what a value they are to young people, particularly young people. And at a time when, as we've been saying, sadly, there is such a high level in some countries of youth unemployment, and that's one of the scars on our society, really, that these programs are helping enormously, and they're also creating a very positive attitude towards the European Union in countries beyond our borders. A year ago, I went under the EP to Campus programme to speak at a seminar in Donetsk University in the Ukraine, and the enthusiasm there was, a conference conducted entirely in English, the enthusiasm there was for building relationships with the European Union and for young people at that university to learn more and have the opportunity to study in other member states. At the seminar, we heard from a young lady, two young people, one man, one woman, who were on an Erasmus exchange in Poland from the Ukraine, and somebody at the University of the Ukraine from the Czech Republic. And this is just the beginning of the kind of links that are being built up. And I think it's enormously to the credit of the Parliament that it has persisted so strongly in trying to expand these programmes, because we do need something positive and encouraging at a time when there does seem to be a lot of negative attitudes around. It's very sad indeed that in some countries concern about the economic crisis we've been going through, which there's a feeling nobody has the real answer to, is spilling over into anti-European feeling. And that's particularly acute in my country. We're very worried about it indeed, some of us. So I think we do need positive messages about what is being achieved and done at the European level.
Thank you, Mr. Elliott. Please, will you continue? Don't make it such a long speech. Please.
I'll try not to, no. No, I had three short points. First of all, when I was Errol McNally, I was a socialist member of the Parliament from 1994 to 2004. And when I was in the Parliament, every year there was a report on human rights in member states. And I remember that we used to be lobbied by our government if there was any criticism of the United Kingdom, for example. And I'm sure the same thing happened to other members from their national governments. If that ceased, that's a pity. That was a very useful piece of work which opened our eyes to how we are seen from outside. I found Frau Buhl's presentation very interesting. Now, unfortunately, I'm not familiar with any of the films or television programmes with which you were associated, so I don't know whether they are rather high culture, which I would imagine Buddenbrooks, for example, or The Life of Thomas Mann is. I can't imagine that millions and millions of Germans want to sit around watching them. What would be great would be more programmes like L'Inspecteur Barnaby, which I watch now that I live in France. In English, it's Midsummer Murders, and it does give a picture of British life, fairly unconvincing, since a small, beautiful English village turns out to be more dangerous than Baltimore in the United States, given the number of murders which apparently take place there. In the UK currently, and again, we're not talking about the mass of the population, we're talking about a rather elite cultured group who watch Borgen, a Danish programme which is excellent, which shows us another way of looking at politics, and we watched what we call Spiral, what the French called Engrenage, which showed us a different way of the justice system working and a probably rather particular view of the French police service in Paris. So I think popular culture. Michael mentioned that the conference he attended, the seminar he gave, was conducted entirely in English. And at some stage, we have to face the fact that we do need to be able to have at our disposal a second language. I spent my professional career persuading people to learn languages other than English. So I do feel that I'm entitled to say that it looks as if the lingua franca will be English. I had some hopes for Esperanto, they've gone. And should we face up to this, should this be part of creating a culture that we do have a common second language, or for some of us first language, which would help to form Europe? That's controversial, I know. I'll stop there.
Thank you. You want to answer immediately? Yes, you have to.
Ich würde sehr gerne kurz darauf.
Yes, I would love to respond to that very briefly. I think that the linguistic problem could be solved if we were to switch to subtitling more. You can see that in smaller countries such as Denmark, the Netherlands, people, by watching things in the original version and getting their own language version provided through the subtitling, they become passively fluent in other languages, or at least they get exposed to other languages. And in the big member state, that's really fallen out of fashion. But I would urge people to distribute films and to support the distribution of European films. And you can do that by providing subtitling. So this would be good not just for the cultural channels, but also the mainstream channels. And that would help ordinary people to just get the exposure to foreign languages and to get a chance to listen to something different. And it would also be important to remember that educational programs shouldn't just be for an elite, a small elite. Let me tell you the show about Thomas Mann. We had 6 million viewers and 1.3 million people at the box office. So that's very, very big. And there was a film on Margareta von Trotter. Some of you may have heard of it. It was a film by Hannah Arendt, who observed the Eichmann process and wrote The Banality of Evil based on that very controversial novel. And the film version of that has been extremely popular in Germany. It's almost entirely made up of dialogue and documentary clips, interview clips, but I think it just goes to show that there's a real interest in discovering our own shared history, the history that, of course, differentiates us but also brings us together. There's a real interest in dealing with our own history in order to build our future. I don't think it's a case of either one or the other. I think you can present difficult subjects in an intelligent way that still is accessible. You can do that in a comedy, for example.
Merci.
Thank you very much. I agree with you on distributing subtitled films because, yes, you can have the original language still, and that can be more interesting, even if sometimes it's tiring. But I wanted to come back to the two problems with human rights. It is true that the Charter of Fundamental Rights has turned out to be a formidable gift to citizens because the Charter is drawn up to judge how European institutions and policies are performing. And it's an extraordinary instrument. We have to see how that could in fact be popularized, and that is provided for to a certain extent in the Charter. And then the values of Europe. They're defined in the treaties. And a mechanism making it possible for a state that doesn't respect human rights to be held up. Human rights are often laid out in the Constitution, but the treaties that countries sign up to, the Convention of the Council of Europe, the Fundamental Declaration of Human Rights, there are mechanisms. They may be complicated, but they do exist. And then as well, the European Union is supposed to defend its values, including in its international relations. And there's an article that specifies that. And I've been present at conferences on women, and the fourth one in Beijing in particular, and I was particularly struck by something there, which I think needs to be duly reflected upon, and that is the fact that in some countries, there is questioning of the universality of rights. And we tend to say that it's the Western countries that have defined these rights. So the countries that aren't respecting them forget that they've signed up to conventions, etc., and they say, well, rights reflect the culture they're developed in, and as such, they cannot be universal in nature. And this is something I really dislike. I don't want to go any further than that, but if Europe says that it defends these values in its international relations, then it really should do so and defend the universality of these rights. Thank you.
Und Herr Carrera, Sie möchten direkt darauf antworten.
Thank you, Mr. Carrera. You wanted to respond to that.
Yes. No, thank you for all your comments and questions.
Moi, je me suis pas présenté, Marie-Claude Vessade, députée de...
I was a socialist member from 1979 to 1994.
Yes, thank you. Concerning the foreign affairs, external relations dilemma, of course, this is absolutely agreed. I mean, how can you go abroad? The tendency has been indeed this. The European Union going abroad and saying only third countries have to comply with rule of law and fundamental rights because, of course, we do take care of that. And this has led to a number of dilemmas of the legitimacy that these kind of discourses and actions have when seen from non-EU countries. I mean, there are a number of mechanisms. Yes, there are a number of instruments which exist in Europe and European Union level, which are destined primarily to ensure that member states comply with fundamental human rights. And they also give us monitoring mechanisms. The Council of Europe is a wonderful example. It's been mentioned, the European Convention on Human Rights, the Strasbourg Court, and other Council of Europe bodies looking at rule of law questions, such as the independence of the judiciary. When it comes to the European Union level, however, what we've seen is that in the examples that I gave during my presentation, such as in France, the expulsion of Romanian and Bulgarian nationals, or current debates on PRISM and NSA surveillance cooperation with the US and EU member states' intelligence surveillance programs. Extraordinary renditions also has been another example. Extraordinary renditions, cooperation with the CIA-led program have all led to this question that member states are only obliged in the EU legal system to comply with fundamental rights when they implement EU law. There is a limitation in the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights, Article 51, which says member states should comply with this charter only when they implement EU law. And this has been the dilemma of DG Justice, the Commission, every single time member states when dealing with these kind of questions. And I think that the Commission perhaps should have not only reacted politically, which our Commissioner for Justice did. For example, in the aftermath of the French affair in 2010, the reaction was very strong, but perhaps also legally, to bring not only a strong political reaction to France, but really to other member states the same, but really bring legal proceedings into play and use the mechanisms that are there. I can mention also Article 7. Treaty on European Union has been perhaps also wrongly labelled as the atomic bomb because of the implications it brings if there is proof that a member state has breached fundamental rights. It has never been used. It has never been used, this Article 7. It's too political in nature, again. So that's why I was saying in my presentation that perhaps what it could be done within the current treaties, without the need to modify the treaties, is that the Commission could develop a systematic monitoring of member states' practices, policies and laws from a rule of law, democracy and fundamental rights perspective. We used to have that also in a network of fundamental rights experts, which actually fed the work of the European Parliament's annual reporting, looking member state by member state, how they were doing on fundamental rights, and now it has been taken over by the Fundamental Rights Agency in Vienna, which unfortunately is also hands tight on what they can do. But coming to the European Parliament, the annual report continues. There is still the annual reporting on fundamental rights, and at the moment MEP Louis Michel is the rapporteur of the new annual report. At CEPS we wrote a study for backing up that report, an independent scholar academic study, looking at the challenges that the European Union faces when monitoring or when safeguarding rule of law. And the problem with this annual report is that it's not legally binding. And also, as you rightly mentioned, it is also politicized. What we need is independent monitoring on what is actually happening, and that this feeds debates at the EU level. And this at the moment does not exist. In France, the expulsions, we've done research on this, they are continuing. In a number of member states, not only the UK, but also other member states, we presented it in the ongoing inquiry committee in Libe on surveillance programs after PRISM. There are a number of EU member states having similar surveillance programs, which are a direct infringement with all our privacy and data protection, to say the least. Nothing has been done. There are a number of issues which are still ongoing and which are particularly worrying from a fundamental rights point of view, and nothing is, we don't see a specific action at EU level because of this predominance of politics. And some member states being very keen in criticising European institutions when it comes to actually meet their obligations. Free movement, I wanted to come back to the question of free movement because I think it's an important one. There was this letter written by 4 ministries of interior in June which provides the background of today's discussion that Commissioner Reding was going to follow up at the JHA Council. So Germany, I think it was Germany, the UK, Austria and the Netherlands. Not by coincidence, they are always the member states coming with usually coming with ways in which to limit free movement and free mobility in Europe. And this letter was alluding to these pressures on infrastructures and on systems and so on and so forth. And I think that the Commission was right in coming back to these member states and saying, where is the evidence of these pressures? Where is the evidence? There hasn't been. They haven't been able, none of those countries, to provide data to the Commission proving that actually there is an unsustainable burden to their social welfare system. And this is fundamental, because if we want to have an informed debate, we can, of course, allude to fears of impact of free movement in Europe without knowing the facts. But I think it is important to bring the facts into the picture. The Commission was also clear, and I think that was right too, to say we cannot take action in purely preventive manner to prevent a pressure that has not arrived yet, but it may. We cannot work under these arrangements. It needs to be based on, it needs to meet proportionality test. Is it necessary to limit free movement, really? Why? On the basis of which evidence? And at the moment it doesn't exist. There seems to be a highly discriminatory, hidden sometimes, message, which brings the Roma, for example, into the picture, and the poor, and the homeless. And this is very problematic as well, because, again, from a non-discriminatory point of view, these people are EU citizens, and as such, they are entitled to equality treatment and to the rights that we all benefit in principle. And Roma are EU citizens, and these people exercise their freedom of movement. And when the expulsions in France is kind of hypocritical, because these people have exercised legitimately the right of freedom of movement to France, and they are not they are framed as nomads and as criminals and as insecurity threat to France, again completely led by fears and unfounded discourses, and they are expelled forcibly to Romania and Bulgaria, and there are a number of issues there as well to be tackled. So perhaps just to put an end to this response, I think that it is very fundamental that also the next European Parliament elections are well informed, so that what politicians and media say is based on, as much as possible, on facts. We cannot just hear more fear-driven messages from politicians and from certain media sources about migration in Europe and about I don't know what. I think it's absolutely central, because this backfire, as someone said before, to the legitimacy of the European Union at the end.
Wir nähern uns dem Ende, meine Damen und Herren.
We're approaching the end of this conference, and we regret not having heard the questions from the journalists. We want to include you in this dialogue, and we hope that you will not just sit in silence and put pen to paper. Please tell us what your thoughts are. We still have a little bit of time left. I know it's always difficult to manage time, and we tend to run out of time just when things get exciting. I'm sure you're familiar with the problem. Karin, did you want the floor? Yes. The question of European values and how to spread them, I think, doesn't really cover it all. When you watch TV on a Saturday night, then you get the impression that Sweden is a terribly dangerous place. So, Mrs. Bull, you make all kinds of films that are very appealing to the masses, but that also deal with societal questions. I was a member from 1989 to 2004, sitting on the Culture Committee, and we kept saying that TV and cinema create a kind of image of society. And when you conduct surveys, you can find that young people feel that cinema really speaks to them, be it in the cinema, but also TV dramas and documentaries. And one film that you've been involved with that was produced by the WDR, German Broadcasting Corporation, that's got huge number of people interested in it. 18 million. It's impossible for us to get that kind of audience here. So I wanted to ask you, what about your strategy for the future? It's important that we raise some of these issues with young people, particularly young people. And these are societal questions that you just can't get through to people with political programs, but you can do with cinema. Well, thank you. I can certainly agree with you. We will only really be able to survive as creators of culture if we get young people interested. Now, this linear system of TV seems to be scared of the rise of the internet. But I'm not. I think you need to find people where they are. And for some young people it's the cinema, but many young people are on the internet at home. And some of these people find it difficult to concentrate for hours on end and to watch one thing. Sometimes there's a temptation to just cut things really short to get through to young people and to use different media. That's one thing. But let's remember that young people are perfectly capable of watching a TV series for hours on end into the early hours of the morning, and that's something we need to remember when we want to reach young people. So we shouldn't be scared of the internet. We should just think of it as a medium for communication where we can publish and screen challenging and intellectually challenging series and programs. Today's viewers like to decide when and where to watch something. And I don't think we should feel threatened by the internet. Is culture something that just adds to our lives and embellishes our lives? Is it a truth, as Brecht says, that first comes food and then morality follows? Or is culture actually something that helps us to talk to each other and something that helps everything make sense and gives us a sense and meaning to our lives? And perhaps this can apply to Europe as well. Thank you. Well, the new cultural programme in Europe is called Creative Europe. And I have to say it has a very strong economic element to it. And maybe that's the right approach. Because if we're too philosophical about all of this, then we might not actually reach the people we're trying to reach. The elite will always feel addressed. So yes, I agree that the economic side does need to be acknowledged, but it's not only about money. And Mrs. Bull, I have heard your call for an internet platform, and Mr. Carrera, your plea for informed discussion, informed debate. I think it's important for us as people to meet each other, to listen to each other's views, to see each other and observe how we each go about our lives. If you've been walking around the corridors here today, you would have been able to see hundreds of people coming to this Parliament, coming to visit, but we might not be able to get our message across to all of them, but it would be good enough if we could at least reach some of these people and get our message about Europe across. As you heard, young people are hungry for answers. They're eagerly awaiting solutions that we've been struggling to find for a decade now, and we need to be more convincing when we talk about these solutions. We need to be true to the citizens. There's no point in us meeting here today if we don't listen to what citizens want, and this is a very, very difficult task indeed. But just looking at you, I can see that you're not scared of this mammoth task that lies ahead, and